Chaos erupted before sunrise. Not the kind you hear about on the news and forget 5 minutes later. Real chaos. The kind that makes governments cancel flights and parents pull their kids out of school without asking questions. Armored vehicles rolled into the mountains of Jalisco like a convoy headed into war. Helicopters circled overhead, not searching, but confirming. Someone important was down there. Someone worth risking a national explosion. Then the shooting started. Automatic gunfire echoed through the forest. Heavy weapons, explosions. The kind of firepower normally reserved for battlefields, not police operations. This wasn't an arrest. This was a hunt. Deep in those mountains was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho, the most feared drug lord in Mexico, leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, a man so dangerous that both Mexico and the United States had been chasing him for years. He had survived everything: cartel wars, government raids, betrayals, manhunts. But not this. Military intelligence had tracked someone close to him to a remote hideout. Once they confirmed he was there, they moved fast, before the cartel could relocate him again. And they knew exactly what would happen next. Because killing a cartel kingpin isn't like arresting a criminal. It's like pulling the pin on a grenade. When the smoke cleared, El Mencho lay wounded, trying to escape through the woods with his bodyguards. He didn't make it far. He was captured, bleeding heavily, and died shortly afterward. Just like that, one of the most powerful criminal bosses on Earth was gone. But the real story didn't start with his death. It started decades earlier, in a dusty village where nobody imagined one of the most violent empires in modern history would be born. A country built on shadows. Mexico didn't wake up one day and suddenly have cartels. The system grew slowly: corruption, poverty, geography, politics, all mixing into something toxic. Drug routes running north to the United States turned entire regions into battleground economies. Some people worked farms, others worked fear. By the time El Mencho was born in 1966, Michoacán was already fertile ground for trafficking. Remote terrain, weak government presence, generations of families surviving however they could. He didn't grow up rich. He grew up watching power belong to men with guns. That kind of childhood teaches a simple lesson. Money talks, violence shouts, and if you want to be heard, you shout louder than everyone else. Ash, the American chapter. Like many young men from rural Mexico, he crossed into the United States looking for opportunity. But opportunity doesn't always wear a suit and tie. Sometimes it comes in the form of street crews, drug money, and a fast way out of poverty. He became involved in heroin trafficking in California, not as a mastermind, just another worker in the machine. Until he got caught. Prison is where criminals either break or upgrade. When he was deported back to Mexico, he didn't return empty-handed. He came back with experience, connections, and a mindset that the legal world had already rejected him. If you can't go legit, you go dominant. In one of the strangest twists of his story, El Mencho reportedly served as a police officer for a time. Not a hero cop, a practical one. Working inside law enforcement gave him something most criminals never get. A blueprint of how the system actually operates, how raids are planned, how intelligence flows, how corruption works. That knowledge would later make him almost impossible to capture, because he wasn't just fighting the government, he understood it. By the early 2000s, Mexico's underworld was reshaping itself. Old cartels splintered, alliances shifted, violence escalated. El Mencho aligned with the Milenio Cartel, a powerful organization operating in western Mexico. It wasn't glamorous work. It was logistics, enforcement, and survival. But he stood out for one reason. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He was efficient. And in organized crime, efficiency is more valuable than charisma. When leaders were arrested or killed, the ambitious stepped forward. El Mencho didn't just step forward. He stepped over bodies, the birth of CJNG. Around 2010, everything changed. The Milenio Cartel fractured under pressure from authorities and rival groups. Out of that chaos, a new organization emerged, leaner, more aggressive, and far more violent. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel. CJNG wasn't trying to blend in. It wanted dominance. Under El Mencho's leadership, the group expanded rapidly, becoming one of Mexico's most powerful trafficking organizations, moving drugs across continents and generating billions in revenue. But drugs alone didn't define them. They used terror as marketing, Public executions, mass killings, videos designed to shock rivals and intimidate communities. CJNG didn't just want territory, they wanted psychological control. Unlike older bosses who cultivated public images, El Mencho stayed hidden. Few photos, few appearances, almost mythical. He ruled through lieutenants, family members, and layers of protection. Meanwhile, his cartel expanded into extortion, fuel theft, kidnapping, and political influence, embedding itself into everyday life in parts of Mexico. In some towns, CJNG provided jobs. In others, it provided funerals. Either way, people depended on them. And dependence creates loyalty, or fear that looks like loyalty. Mid-2010s, governments on both sides of the border considered El Mencho one of the biggest threats in organized crime. Huge rewards were offered for information leading to his capture. Still nothing. Every raid came up empty, every rumor faded. He moved constantly, staying in rural strongholds protected by loyal fighters who treated him less like a boss and more like a war commander. Because that's what he had become. Not a smuggler, a general. History shows that men who rise through violence rarely stop voluntarily. They don't retire peacefully. They don't step aside. They keep going until something stops them. Prison, betrayal, or death. For El Mencho, it would be death. But when he fell, he didn't fall alone. He took an entire country into crisis with him. Power in Mexico's underworld used to follow a pattern. Smuggle quietly, bribe strategically, kill only when necessary. El Mencho threw that playbook in the trash. CJNG didn't want to hide, they wanted to dominate. Convoys of armored trucks started appearing on rural highways. Not sneaking, not blending in, but rolling openly like military patrols. Masked gunmen stood in the back with heavy weapons, scanning the roads as if they owned them. In many places, they did. This wasn't just a drug organization anymore, it was a private army. CJNG recruits weren't just street thugs with pistols. Many were former soldiers, police officers, or trained enforcers from other groups. Discipline mattered, coordination mattered, loyalty mattered even more. And loyalty was enforced the old-fashioned way, through fear. Training camps operated in remote areas. New members learned how to use assault rifles, coordinate ambushes, and conduct operations like small military units. They studied terrain, communication tactics, rapid movement. El Mencho didn't want gangsters, he wanted fighters. Because he knew something most cartel leaders eventually learn. The real enemy isn't just rival groups, it's the state. In 2015, something happened that changed how the world viewed this cartel forever. Mexican security forces launched an operation to capture El Mencho. Helicopters moved in, carrying elite troops, expecting resistance but not catastrophe. They underestimated CJNG. As the aircraft approached, cartel gunmen opened fire with military-grade weapons. Rockets streaked through the sky. One struck the helicopter. The explosion tore through the airframe, sending it spiraling down. Flames, smoke, chaos. Soldiers died before they even hit the ground. It wasn't an accident, it was a message. CJNG had just proven it could shoot down the Mexican military itself. After that day, nobody called them just another cartel. They were seen as something far more dangerous, a force capable of challenging the government directly. And at the center of it all was a man nobody could find. Unlike flashy drug lords who crave attention, El Mencho operated in silence. No lavish public appearances, no interviews, no gold-plated mansions displayed on social media. He stayed in the shadows while his organization expanded across Mexico and into dozens of countries. Information about him came through fragments, intelligence reports, intercepted communications, stories from captured operatives. To his enemies, he became almost mythical. Some said he never slept in the same place twice. Others claimed entire villages protected him. Some believed he had lookalikes to confuse authorities. Whether true or not, the effect was the same. Fear grows faster when you can't see the source. Violence built CJNG's reputation, but money built its empire. Methamphetamine labs operated at industrial scale. Synthetic drugs became the future, cheaper to produce, easier to transport, harder to trace. Harder to trace. Cocaine shipments moved through ports. Fentanyl flowed north into the United States. Local operations generated cash through extortion and fuel theft. Entire economies started orbiting around cartel activity. In some towns, people depended on CJNG for jobs, protection, or simply survival. Refusing to cooperate wasn't bravery, it was a death sentence. That's how cartels maintain control without constant fighting. They become part of daily life. Older cartels often preferred discretion. Violence happened, but it wasn't always broadcast. CJNG did the opposite. Videos surfaced showing convoys of masked gunmen pledging loyalty, displays of weapons laid out like military arsenals, public punishments designed to terrify rivals and civilians alike. Psychological warfare. If your enemies believe you are unstoppable, they hesitate. And hesitation is fatal in cartel territory. Mencho understood that reputation could win battles before bullets were fired. CJNG didn't just clash with government forces. They fought rival cartels across multiple regions, seeking control of trafficking routes and strategic territory. Battles erupted in cities, highways, and rural strongholds. Entire communities found themselves caught between competing armed groups, unsure which side would take control tomorrow. Alliances shifted constantly. Friends became enemies overnight. Enemies sometimes became temporary partners, but one thing remained consistent. CJNG kept expanding, and expansion always attracts attention. As fentanyl overdoses surged in the United States, authorities intensified their focus on the organizations responsible for producing and trafficking the drug. CJNG quickly moved to the top of that list. Rewards for information about Mencho climbed into the millions. Task forces coordinated across borders, surveillance increased, financial networks were targeted, but capturing him proved nearly impossible. Every time authorities closed in, he disappeared. Someone warned him, someone moved him, someone always stayed loyal. In a system built on corruption and fear, secrets rarely stay secret, unless everyone involved is too afraid to talk. Many cartel leaders rely on family to maintain control. Blood ties are harder to break than business alliances. Mencho did the same. Relatives held key positions within CJNG, managing operations, finances, and security. This structure reduced the risk of betrayal, but it also meant that when authorities targeted the organization, family members became prime targets. Arrests, extraditions, and seizures hit his inner circle over the years. Still, the organization kept running, because CJNG wasn't just one man anymore. It was a system. Success breeds confidence. Confidence breeds risk. As CJNG grew stronger, its operations became more visible, more aggressive, more difficult to ignore. Entire regions experienced spikes in violence as battles for control intensified. Governments can tolerate corruption, they can tolerate smuggling, but they cannot tolerate open challenges to their authority forever. Eventually, pressure builds, and when pressure peaks, something breaks. By the early 2020s, Mexico faced a grim reality. A cartel powerful enough to rival state forces, a leader who remained elusive, communities trapped in cycles of violence. Every rumor of Mencho's capture triggered waves of panic, roadblocks, shootings, shutdowns, as CJNG demonstrated its ability to retaliate instantly. Authorities knew that taking him down wouldn't end the violence. It might ignite something worse. But leaving him in power meant accepting that parts of the country operated outside government control. There was no safe option, only a choice between bad and catastrophic. Somewhere, quietly, intelligence agencies began closing the net. Not through dramatic raids, through patience, tracking associates, monitoring communications, following money, waiting for one mistake. Because even the most careful fugitives rely on other people, and people are the weakest link in any empire. There's a moment in every conflict when lines disappear. No clear good guys, no clear bad guys, just whoever controls the ground. In parts of western Mexico, CJNG didn't just control territory, they controlled reality. If you woke up in one of those towns, your safety didn't depend on police patrols or emergency services. It depended on whether the cartel decided you could keep living your normal life. Schools opened because they allowed it. Businesses operated because they taxed it. Local officials stayed in office because they approved it. This wasn't crime operating in the shadows anymore. It was power operating in daylight. People outside Mexico often imagine cartel zones as non-stop war zones, bullets flying every hour, chaos everywhere. The truth is more unsettling. Most days are quiet. Kids walk to school, markets open, music plays from storefronts, because the cartel prefers stability. Stability keeps money flowing. Violence is used selectively, not randomly, to maintain control. If someone refuses to cooperate, disappears, or challenges authority, the response is swift and public. Not just to punish that person, but to remind everyone else what happens when you step out of line. Fear doesn't need constant reinforcement, just occasional demonstrations. CJNG didn't rely only on drug money. That would be too unstable. Instead, they built a diversified revenue system: extortion from businesses, fuel theft from pipelines, kidnapping operations, control over construction projects. If money moved, they took a cut. For some companies, paying the cartel wasn't optional. It was simply another operating cost, like rent or utilities, except the consequences for non-payment were far more severe. Entire industries functioned under this shadow tax system, and once that system takes hold, removing it becomes incredibly difficult. Too many people depend on it. Too many people benefit from it. Too many people fear what happens if it collapses overnight. Cartels don't need to run for office to influence government. Control enough territory and politicians come to you. Local elections in cartel-dominated areas often revolve around one question: which candidate is acceptable to the armed group in charge? Support can come quietly, funding, protection, intimidation of opponents, or it can come loudly, through threats and violence. Either way, the outcome tends to align with cartel interests. This doesn't mean every official is corrupt, but in places where armed men outnumber police officers, survival becomes the priority. From the outside, CJNG looked like a chaotic network of criminals. Inside, it functioned with surprising organization. Regional commanders controlled specific territories. Specialized units handled trafficking routes, enforcement, or finances. Communication flowed through secure channels to prevent leaks. And at the top sat El Mencho, distant, rarely seen, but always present through orders delivered down the chain. His authority wasn't maintained through speeches or charisma. It was maintained through results. As long as money flowed and territory expanded, loyalty remained strong. Trust is fragile in criminal organizations. Fear lasts longer. Stories circulated about what happened to those who betrayed CJNG. Stories designed to discourage even the thought of disloyalty. Whether every detail was true didn't matter. What mattered was that people believed it. Punishments weren't just about removing traitors. They were about reinforcing the idea that betrayal is worse than death. In that environment, silence becomes the safest choice. Blood ties form the core of El Mencho's security. Relatives manage key operations, ensuring that the people closest to power were also the least likely to defect. Family loyalty runs deep, but it also concentrates risk. When authorities targeted CJNG leadership, they often focused on relatives, hoping pressure would ripple upward. Arrests of family members sent shockwaves through the organization, but they didn't collapse it. The structure had been built to survive losses, replace the fallen, continue operations. That's how empires endure. Power isn't just about weapons, it's about perception. If people believe resistance is hopeless, they stop resisting. If they believe cooperation guarantees safety, they cooperate. CJNG cultivated that perception carefully. Public displays of strength, rapid retaliation against rivals, selective generosity toward communities. In some areas, the cartel funded local events, provided supplies, or helped residents during crises. These acts weren't charity, they were strategy. Gratitude can be as binding as fear. Authorities confronting CJNG posed a brutal problem. Large-scale operations risked civilian casualties and massive retaliation. Smaller operations often failed because the cartel had advance warning. Every move carried consequences. Do nothing and the cartel grows stronger. Act aggressively and violence escalates nationwide. There was no clean solution, just damage control. Cartel alliances shift constantly, but rivalries can last generations. CJNG's expansion brought it into conflict with multiple groups competing for territory and trafficking routes. Each battle left behind casualties, displaced families, and communities struggling to recover. These weren't quick skirmishes. They were prolonged conflicts with no formal end. And as long as profits remained high, there was no incentive for peace. Despite the chaos surrounding him, El Mencho remained largely invisible. Few confirmed sightings, minimal communication outside trusted channels, constant movement between secure locations. He understood that visibility invites vulnerability. By staying hidden, he forced his enemies to fight a shadow, and shadows are hard to kill. But no system is perfect. Expansion stretches resources. Loyalty becomes harder to guarantee across vast territories. Internal disputes emerge, external pressure intensifies. Bit by bit, the foundation begins to weaken. Not enough to collapse immediately, just enough to create opportunities. And somewhere within the intelligence community, analysts were watching those cracks widen, waiting for the moment when patience would pay off. The cost. For ordinary people caught in the middle, none of this felt strategic or inevitable. It felt personal. Loved ones lost, businesses destroyed, daily life shaped by forces beyond their control. To them, El Mencho wasn't a mastermind or a ghost. He was the reason their world had changed. And when someone like that falls, relief mixes with dread. Because removing the king doesn't guarantee peace. Sometimes it guarantees war. Math. This wasn't an arrest. It was an execution wrapped in a military operation. For years, governments tracked him and failed. Raids hit empty houses, convoys vanished before troops arrived, informants disappeared, intelligence leaked. Every attempt ended the same way. Nothing. Until someone close to him made a mistake. Not a gunfight mistake, a human mistake. Someone visited him. And in this world, visits get watched, signals get intercepted, movements get flagged, patterns get built, slowly, quietly, without headlines. Then one day, the pattern becomes a location, and the location becomes a target. Killing a cartel boss isn't tactical, it's political. Everyone at the top knew exactly what would follow. Roadblocks, mass shootings, burned vehicles, cities paralyzed. You don't remove a man like El Mencho and expect business as usual the next morning. So the question wasn't, can we do it? The question was, are we ready for what comes next? This time, the answer was yes. No negotiation attempts, no public warnings, no slow build-up, just a green light. Pre-dawn. Elite units moved in under darkness, helicopters overhead, ground forces sealing escape routes, communications locked down. They hit a remote area in the mountains of Jalisco, terrain perfect for hiding, but terrible for running once surrounded. Cartel lookouts spotted them first. Gunfire erupted immediately. Not pistols, not random shots, military-grade rifles, explosives. Sustained fire meant to punch through armored vehicles and force troops back. But this wasn't a patrol they could scare off. This was the full force. Soldiers advanced anyway. The firefight. The forest turned into a war zone. Explosions ripped through trees. Tracer rounds cut through the darkness. Commands shouted over gunfire. Helicopters circling like predators above the canopy. Cartel fighters knew the terrain. The military had overwhelming power. It became a battle of minutes. Because once the perimeter tightens, escape disappears. El Mencho didn't surrender. He ran. Not in some armored convoy. Not in a dramatic helicopter lift. On foot, through brush, through mud, through terrain that slows everyone down equally. Bodyguards stayed close, returning fire, trying to buy seconds, not victory, just seconds. But seconds weren't enough. He was hit, wounded badly, bleeding. The myth of the untouchable king reduced to a man trying to stay upright. He was found hiding in the woods, captured alive, barely. No speeches, no defiance, no cinematic last stand. Just a wounded man surrounded by soldiers who had spent years trying to find him. He didn't make it to a courtroom. He died shortly afterward. Just like that, the most feared drug lord in Mexico was gone. No parade, no announcement beforehand, no victory lap, just confirmation. Target neutralized. In hours, the country started shaking, not literally, socially. Roadblocks appeared across multiple states, trucks hijacked and burned to block highways, armed men shutting down traffic, gunfire reported in cities hundreds of miles apart. Public transportation stopped, businesses closed early, airports went on alert, people didn't wait for official statements. They knew. When a king falls, the soldiers go wild. CJNG units moved fast, burned buses, hijacked cargo trucks, armed patrols on highways. The goal wasn't random destruction, it was paralysis. Shut everything down. Show the country and the world that even without their leader, they could still disrupt daily life at will. Parents kept children home. Workers didn't show up. Entire neighborhoods locked themselves indoors. Fear spread faster than any official information. Removing a cartel boss doesn't eliminate the cartel. It destabilizes it. Commanders start calculating, rivals start probing, alliances start shifting. Everyone with influence begins asking the same question: who's in charge now? And when that question has no clear answer, violence fills the gap. Internal struggles can be more brutal than external wars. Former allies become competitors overnight. Old grievances resurface. Loyalty gets tested at gunpoint. This is the phase experts fear most. Not the reign of the king. The scramble after the throne is empty. El Mencho wasn't just another trafficker. He commanded one of the most aggressive, expansion-driven cartels in modern history. Synthetic drugs flooding international markets, operations spreading across continents, violence escalating wherever resistance appeared. As long as he remained free, the organization had a central brain. Remove that brain and the system has to reconfigure. That was the strategy. Not instant peace, controlled disruption. Drug markets don't pause for political events. Supply chains shift, new routes open, other groups move in. Some operations continue unchanged because the infrastructure already exists. In the criminal world, leadership is replaceable. Profits aren't. So while governments celebrated the removal of a major target, analysts quietly asked a harder question. Did this actually solve anything? Or did it just change the shape of the problem? The legacy of fear. For years, El Mencho ruled from the shadows. Invisible, but everywhere. His name alone carried weight. Communities whispered it, rivals feared it, authorities built entire operations around it. Now that name belongs to history. But the system he built didn't disappear with him. Cartels aren't built like corporations with retirement plans. They're built like organisms. Cut off one head, others adapt. Behind every headline are ordinary people who had nothing to do with any of it. Families trapped in cities shut down overnight, workers unable to reach jobs, patients struggling to access hospitals, children asking why school suddenly stopped. For them, this wasn't geopolitics, it was survival. And survival doesn't care who wins, it just cares who's still standing tomorrow. El Mencho rose from poverty to command an empire fueled by drugs, money, and violence. He outmaneuvered rivals, evaded authorities, and built a force capable of challenging the state itself. But in the end, he died the same way many men in that world do. Cornered, wounded, alone in the dirt. No crown, no ceremony, no escape. Just another body in a conflict that has claimed thousands before him and will likely claim thousands more. Power in the underworld is temporary. Fear lasts longer, and the damage left behind lasts longest of all. El Mencho is gone. The violence isn't.